Thank you. I'm delighted to welcome today the Secretary-General of the United Nations. We've had good discussions today. I did start by conveying to the Secretary-General the condolences of the Australian people following the attack on the United Nations mission in Nigeria with the loss of life. We've both reflected that this is a very concerning development where the United Nations was directly targeted, and so our condolences as an Australian nation go to the Secretary-General following that attack. Australia is a strong supporter of the United Nations. We were there as a founding member. We are there today with the decades of collaboration and work together in between. We are strong supporters of the United Nations and its work because we understand that the work of the United Nations brings our world together to address some difficult problems. Australia will continue to pursue its bid for election to the United Nations Security Council because we believe in the work of the United Nations and its importance. We believe in the work of the United Nations Security Council and its importance, and we believe Australia's voice should be heard there. Of course, the UN Security Council has mandates which govern our deployment and work in Afghanistan and in East Timor. The sanctions that we have engaged in against Iran and North Korea have been under a United Nations Security Council resolution, and we have provided strong support to the work of the Security Council in relation to its actions to protect civilians in Libya. We've talked across many of these issues today, the Secretary-General and I. We've particularly talked about the recent meeting of the Libya support group that the Secretary-General has just attended and literally flown from to be here in Australia. We talked about the escalating crisis in the Horn of Africa, a humanitarian crisis that I conveyed to the Secretary-General so many Australians are individually concerned about and have made direct donations to. Today, I am able to announce that we will provide an additional $10 million to the United Nations Children's Fund for its work in addressing this crisis. This brings the assistance to Australia for this crisis to almost $100 million, and separate to that work by the government, Australians themselves individually have dug deep. I was also pleased to offer to the Secretary-General today the services of up to 25 Australian Defence Force personnel and 10 federal police to the UN mission in South Sudan, and we have talked about South Sudan in our discussions today. And also to support the UN's crucial peacekeeping and peace-building role, I am announcing today that we will make available a further $4.5 million to support the UN Department of Political Affairs work. It's this work that goes to conflict prevention and conflict response. The Secretary-General has changed his program. He needed to do that in order to accommodate attending both the meeting on Libya and then being here in Australia. But we're pleased to welcome him, and we are delighted that he will proceed from here to the Pacific. He will be going to Kiribati personally, he will be going to the Solomon Islands, and then he will attend the Pacific Island Forum in New Zealand. He is the first Secretary-General of the United Nations to do so, and we very much value the fact that he is taking the time and the trouble and travelling the distance to be physically present in the Pacific. This is, of course, a region vital to us, Australia. It's the region in which we live. I'm looking forward to attending the Pacific Island Forum, and I thank the Secretary-General for attending that forum and being the first to do so. So, Your Excellency, you are very welcome here. We're very honoured to have you, and I'd invite you to make some remarks now.
Thank you, Madam Prime Minister, for your very warm welcome. And this is a great pleasure for me to visit Australia at the beginning of spring. It's a wonderful place. This is not my first visit to Canberra or Sydney. in my previous capacity as a foreign minister and other capacities, I have been visiting many times, and it's a great pleasure for me to visit as a Secretary General of the United Nations for the first time. And I thank you very much for your flexibility for me to be able to participate in the Paris meeting on Libya. And to make up for loss, I'm going to visit twice in just a 1 week time, Australia. So I hope that this will be a good consolation for that. In fact, like it so much, I'm coming, I'll try to come back as often as possible. Australia is a strong voice in international affairs, working together with the United Nations in addressing many challenges which we face. And in my meeting, and I highly commended the leadership of Prime Minister Gillard for her leadership to work together with the UN in addressing all these peace and security issues, development and human rights, and all these are very important contributions. Australia is one of the strongest supporters of the United Nations and one of the best examples how and what UN member states should and can do for a common interest of the international community. You may be known as Down Under, but when it comes to contribution and commitment, you are well above and beyond. Australia is a founding member of the United Nations, and Australians were instrumental in helping to formulate United Nations Charter. And I have many good historical record how distinguished Australian diplomats have made contribution to the drafting of the Charter, human rights, and women's empowerment, and also first President of the United Nations Security Council was served by a distinguished Australian. You continue this proud tradition with your record of leadership across the full range of our work, from peacekeeping to global development to nuclear disarmament. And I thank you very much for your announcement of providing your distinguished soldiers and police officers to South Sudan. And Australia's support for our operations in Timor-Leste has been indispensable. Australia is critical to peacekeeping efforts from Afghanistan to Cyprus, where you set the UN record for the longest continuous deployment by any country. This 100th continuous deployment of peacekeeping operations in Cyprus is the highest record so far in the history of the United Nations. On foreign aid, Australia is increasing cooperation at a time when too many countries are pulling back. And I thank you very much for your very generous contribution to the humanitarian crisis in Horn of Africa by donating additional $10 million. This will put you one of the very few, just a number, within number 5, you are, I think, number 4, strongest supporter to this Horn of Africa crisis. Australian impulse for global cooperation, that positive faith in people, is what we need as we face the big challenges of our time. From here, I'll visit, as has been announced by Prime Minister, the Solomon Island and Kiribati, before heading to a Pacific Island Forum, a leaders meeting in New Zealand. Building a more sustainable future will be at the center of my visits. Australia knows better than many others how critical it is to live in balance with nature. The floods in Queensland and other natural disasters here showed how extreme weather and climate change are real and growing threats. Your neighbors are even more vulnerable. Whole islands could be lost if sea levels continue to rise. Later this year, countries will meet in Durban, South Africa. We need ambitious targets to keep the rise in average global temperature below 2 degrees centigrade. And we need to move forward on adaptation. That means countries must live to their abilities and responsibilities. Time is of the essence. It has been nearly 2 decades since the world met in Rio de Janeiro for the first Earth Summit. Next year, the leaders of the world will meet in Rio de Janeiro for Rio Plus 20 Summit meeting, and I have invited Prime Minister Gillard to participate herself. I hope you will take my invitation positively. With so much at stake, this is not the time for gamesmanship. This is the time to work together to get real results. Finally, since I'm coming from the Paris meeting on Libya, let me say a few words about the situation there. I continue to urge all countries to come together to help the Libyan people. The United Nations response rests on 3 fundamental principles. First, national ownership. Future of Libya should be decided by Libyan people. And I have met the chairman of NTC, Mr. Jalil, and the head of Executive Bureau, Mr. Jibril, together. And we discussed what their needs and priorities would be, and we will reflect and respect their needs and priorities. Second, rapid response and delivery. We are working to make sure that United Nations can respond swiftly to requests by the Libyan authorities. This includes restoring public security and order, and promoting rule of law, promoting inclusive political dialogue and national reconciliation, and protecting human rights, particularly for vulnerable groups, and assisting electoral processes, and also facilitating the constitution making. Our third principle is effective coordination. We are working closely with the country's leadership to ensure that confusion and duplication of effort are kept to a minimum. We have to avoid all these duplications. On these challenges and many others, we depend on the support of Australia. At this critical moment in history, when so much is at stake for people in developed and developing countries, I'm here to say to Australia, we need your ideas, your experience, and your continued commitment. I count on Australia to be a vital partner in meeting the expectations of the world's people for freedom, opportunity, and the life of dignity everyone deserves. And I thank you very much.